Hey Alyssa, how you doing? I'm gonna be a little loud there, my volume. Hold on. Sorry, I'm sitting here getting ready still. Thought I would go live and give you guys a chance to show up. Appreciate you getting here early. You're always here early. You always sitting there waiting, chomping at the bit to learn about economics or not. But that's fine. I got some weird going on with my green screen today. Doesn't like my hair. My hair's too thin for a green screen. Hey Tyler, you're always here early too. Andrew in the house. Appreciate you guys showing up. I'll get going here in a second. Anybody getting sick? I think I got a cold. How did I catch a cold? I haven't seen anybody. I haven't been around anybody. Maybe it's just allergies. But all the rain should have washed all the pollen away, so I don't know. I think I'm just dying. Hey, Colby. So, got people showing up here. I'll get started in a second. Give people a chance to get logged in. I can tell how many people are in the house, so I know we should have about 10 to 13. We'll get going. Doing chapter 10 today. Pretty short chapter. We'll see. Hey, Zach. I have a habit of doing that. I shorten people's names, whether they like it or not. Like, I don't know, Zachary. I just said Zach. Like we're buddies. Like we go back years. I don't know if that's appropriate or not. I mean, I didn't do that with Andrew. I didn't call Andrew Drew. Or I didn't call Tyler Ty. Or Alyssa Allie. I could have done that too. But I didn't. For some reason, Zach, I just shortened it automatically. If you have a preferred name, let me know. Or make one up. It'd be kind of funny. I like to be called Pookie. Something like that would be kind of funny. And I'd be calling you Pookie, but nobody would ever call you that. That's one thing you can do. Chapter 10 is pretty interesting. We're getting into the last two chapters here. So we're going to do two more chapters this week and next week, chapters 10 and 11. And that's going to finish the material. Then I'll give you a week to do your final. Oh, I haven't graded your tests yet, which is kind of slack on my part. But I do have them. I was giving people a chance to get them. Some people had a problem uploading, so they emailed them to me. So I got to kind of consolidate everything and get the test graded, and I'll put it up on D2L. And you'll see it there. How'd that work out? Any feedback on the test? We just gave you guys a multiple choice test as a take-home exam, and so that should help with your grades and everything. I think probably just as good a way of learning the material. It's just not traditional, but nothing is really traditional right now, so there you go. All right. Well, there's 5 minutes. People have had 5 minutes to get this figured out, and I'm going to get started. So those of you on time don't have to be here any longer. Hey, Katrina. All right. Oh, man. How long are we going to do this? Do you guys know how long we're supposed to do this? Let me do something to start off with. I have a little thing here planned for you guys to start off with. All right. Anybody notice oil prices? The whole gasoline market. You know, one thing about economics that you should take from this class, from microeconomics, one thing you need to kind of learn is that prices are a function of supply and demand, and nothing is a bit more representative of that right now than gasoline prices. A very competitive market on the gasoline side, not on the oil side. We have a very distorted market on the factor market for oil, but we've talked about all these things now, from the factor markets to the product market, and you think about it, gasoline is something in the product market. It's a final good that you purchase on a regular basis, and you're keenly aware of how those prices change. It's not COVID. How those prices change day to day, week to week, month to month, and year to year. And you may have noticed something with gas prices right now. I checked. The lowest price in the state of Georgia right now is like $1.30 something. The lowest price in South Carolina is $1.21. The prices are slightly distorted. Technically, you should be paying that's a tough call. There's a lot of taxes that you pay on a gallon of gas. So gasoline is taxed extremely high. There's not just sales tax, but there's all kinds of gasoline taxes that you pay that are kind of embedded in the price. So when you pay $2 for a gallon of gas, which is $2.20, whatever the normal price is, you're kind of accustomed to paying in the past few years. Whenever you pay $2.50 for a gallon of gas, there's a good bit of like $1.50 in there of taxes that you're paying. So the actual underlying commodity price of the actual good that you're purchasing is only a small part of the overall price. But just kind of ignore that. Pretend that those taxes aren't there, and that we're just that's just the way it works. You've noticed that the price of gas has come down considerably right now. And one reason is the price of oil fell. Today, the price of oil just plummeted again, and it dropped down to $10.34 a gallon, the lowest price in 34 years. 30 years ago, I was paying 89 to 99 cents for a gallon of gas. Now it's coming down to about $1.20, $1.30 in those same markets. So there's a little more tax built in there than there used to be, because really that's an all-time. That's as low as gasoline prices have been. And if you think about it, 30 years ago, you got to account for inflation. So $10 a barrel for oil, which is an input into the production of gasoline, of course, $10 per barrel 30 years ago is more like 17 or 18 or $20 a barrel in today's dollars. So a $10 price tag, $10 per barrel oil today is exceptionally low. So that's just something to consider. And so we should be seeing very, very low gas prices, and we are. So what can you divine? You kind of know the story, right? Prior, at the end of last year, the beginning of this semester, in January, when we first started meeting in our class, there was a demand for gasoline, and then there was a supply of gasoline, and one of the inputs into the supply of gasoline is a barrel of oil, and that barrel at the start in January was $60 a barrel. Now the input price has fallen precipitously. So the input price has fallen, and what does that do? Let's draw it, shall we? How do I do this? There you go. What? Right. Man. That sucks. My some kind of trial expired. I can do it this way. Let's just quickly go through and remember how supply and demand works. So it's just as a quick review before we get into chapter 10, just to kind of show you what we learned. Make sure that you guys get this. There's your price. There's your quantity. I took all this time this morning to get the stupid thing set up, and it just said your trial has expired. It wasn't a free trial. I paid for it. All right. So there's the supply of gasoline and there's the demand for gasoline, and this is back in January, right? And so the price was hovering somewhere, let's say around $2.30 or something like that. All right. There you go. $2.30 for a gallon of gas. And I can, and then there was some quantity. Don't worry about the quantity. Let's just focus on the price for now. And so as input prices fall, that causes an increase in supply. We learned that back in chapter 4. So we've had this massive increase in the supply of oil. Not only that, OPEC has been going crazy. Saudi Arabia has been crazy, pumping oil and increasing the supply that way. So there was this whole supply thing of oil just dumped on the market. And that means that gas is very cheap to make right now. And that means that the supply is dramatically increased. But now that we're all locked up in our houses, what's happened to the demand? I mean, this is pretty obvious what's happened to the demand. Have you guys noticed? I've filled up 1 tank of gas since February. 1 tank. I normally would have bought 4 tanks by now. So there's been a huge decline in the demand for gasoline. So we've had a huge decrease in the demand for gasoline. So these are the things that happened, and as could be predicted, we're now seeing like $1.40 is the price for gas that you're paying at the pump. And the problem is the price of gas is cheap as hell and nobody wants to buy it. Nobody's going anywhere. So it's like you don't even need to buy it. I just need to go fill up all my cars. I'm going to go do that today. Today might be the bottom. It might be the bottom of the gas prices. Yeah, I'm going to go fill up all my tanks today. Because I probably won't, once the economy, so what's going to happen? What's going to happen in May when people start getting back into business? First of all, that, we're at all-time lows in the input of oil into the gasoline. So this is the market for gas that I'm showing you here. But oil prices are going to have to come back up. Eventually, OPEC, Saudi Arabia will stop this nonsense because they're losing a ton of money right now. And they'll get the gallon of oil back up. So by May, hopefully the markets will return to normal. People will start traveling again. They'll start doing things. And so we should see the demand recover and then the supply kind of shift back. And we should expect the prices to come back up again for gasoline. Which, it's great that gasoline is cheap right now. So that sounds like that's a return to normal is actually kind of bad, isn't it? We'd rather it stay down low like that as consumers. But there's a lot of problems with that. At this low of a price for a barrel of oil, that hurts the U.S. economy in some ways, and that has spillover effects. And I won't get into the details there, but basically, we produce a lot of oil in this country, and on the supply side, the producer side, if that price remains that low for that long, we're going to lose a lot of jobs and that kind of stuff. So, anyway, that was something that I wanted to show you guys. With this, something worth paying attention to, and some of the stuff that we've learned in this class this semester, it's all kind of on display right now in the oil market. This is also for West Texas Intermediate, which the Brent crude oil is a little bit higher, and that might be why on the East Coast the prices haven't quite come down as much as I would anticipate. But there's that. Okay. That being said, we need to get into chapter 10. I'm going to run through this real quick with you guys. We'll knock out chapter 10 today, and then chapter 11 next week, and then that's all the material for the semester. You'll have your final exam. It'll be cumulative. It'll cover some of the stuff from the rest of the class. So we'll have it that, and then we'll be done for the semester. So here we go. When we talk about the efficiency of markets and how markets tend to produce the optimal allocation of resources, what we've been assuming all semester is that there are no externalities. Chapter 10 deals with these things called externalities. And externalities are when the costs or the benefits of some activity don't go to to the agent who's engaging in that activity. So if it's the consumer or the producer, one of them is not bearing all the costs or the benefits of their activity. So what that does is it causes individual players in the economy to either overdo something or underdo it. So we're going to be talking about the provision of a good or the demand for a particular good as being too much or too little, too much being supplied or too little being supplied because of some external force that distorts the markets and causes things not to work out the way we want to. So that's been kind of the whole point of economics. If you've been kind of paying attention this semester, I've been talking about the free markets as being an efficient way to allocate resources. And what does that mean? It means that at the end of the day, the markets have this tendency to make as many people as well off as possible given the scarcity of resources. So free markets are a way to maximize social welfare given the underlying scarcity of resources. When you have externalities thrown into the mix, it causes that to not be true. When you have externalities, you don't maximize social welfare, you get a suboptimal social outcome. So if economists are going to be big on free markets, we have to be honest with people and say, look, sometimes there's these problems with there's these distortions in the free markets called externalities. And those externalities can cause a misallocation of resources, and they can cause the markets to not deliver on that promise. So that's ultimately, that's one of the things that we're really concerned with when it comes to free markets, because if we don't address these things, then people will lose confidence in the free markets and they'll say, see, we told you your free markets don't work that well. And that's kind of a shame, because externalities are going to exist whether you're using a free market or not, but these typically cause problems in the market, and we want to talk about how they are, what they are. So basically there's four types. There's into two categories. There's production externalities and there's consumption externalities. So you got a set of production and a set of consumption, and they can either be positive or negative. So you got positive production, negative production externalities, positive consumption, and negative consumption externality. Those are the four main types. Production externalities affect the supply curve, and consumption externalities affect the demand curve. So we'll be going back and I'll be drawing a graph and showing you how that works out. But the basic idea is that externalities are costs that go to society that do not go to the private entity engaging in the behaviors. Let me give you a quick example, and you'll kind of see how this works. The basic idea is this. I've got allergies. It's not COVID. I swear it's not COVID. I haven't seen anybody. All right. Let's say that there's a manufacturing company that makes tires. Okay, what do we want? We want to make the right number of tires, not too few tires and not too many tires. Let's say that factory is located next to a river, and that when they make tires, there's a lot of nasty stuff. It's a petroleum kind of business, plastics and rubber and solvents and machinery and degreasers and all this stuff that they've got. A lot of chemicals that they're using to make tires. There's also metals, steel belted, so they've got metals they're dealing with, and those can have those can contaminate the groundwater and stuff like that. But anyway, there's all this stuff that the tire manufacturing facility has that it has to it has a waste stream, so to speak. Let's just say, for the sake of argument, that all of that pollution goes into the river that they're right next to, and that pollution then washes down the river. And downstream from this facility, you've got people who like to swim in the river, you got people who like to fish in the river, and generally just there's a lot of recreational activity in the river downstream. So when the rubber tire manufacturing facility is making their tires, they're bearing most of the cost of their activity is in the raw materials and the labor and the real estate and all that kind of stuff. So they have all their costs, their private costs that they pay. But notice there's also a social cost to what they're doing. And that pollution is the social cost of their activity. Okay? They also receive the benefits of their activity, which is they sell tires and they make money from that. So they get the profits or the revenues, at least they get the revenues from the tires. That's the benefit. But the costs are partially borne by them and then partially go to social costs or society with the pollution downstream. If all of the costs are not being factored into their math, then their costs are relatively too low relative to their benefits. And that's going to cause them to increase the activity level, and they're going to be making too many tires, and as a result, we're going to have too much pollution. What you want to do from a public policy perspective with these kind of things, with externalities, is the solution to that is to internalize the externality. Make the industry, the company making rubber tires, make them bear the cost of that pollution. Make them treat that pollution before they discharge it into the river, or compensate those who've been damaged by that pollution, and then that gets their costs back up to where they should be, and then they can make an optimal decision. Then the markets work well. So this brings up a whole host of ideas that you may not have expected from a free market economics perspective. But in free market economics, you have to account for these externalities, and if you don't, then the free markets don't deliver on their promise. So that's the basic rule there. There's also that would be a negative production externality. So pollution in general terms is a negative, creates a negative production externality, and that causes an over provision of a particular good. I'm going to let you guys use your textbook. I don't want to draw the graphs because they'll be messy and they'll probably confuse you more than anything else. You'll see where the private costs and the social costs are factored into the supply curve, and just understand that with production externalities, it's going to impact the supply curve. And I'll let you guys do your part as now that this class is kind of a de facto hybrid class, let you guys kind of look at that on your own, because I just don't want to draw them because they'll be messy. There's also positive production externalities. Positive production externalities are when the activity of a firm bestows a positive benefit on other firms or on society in general. An example of that is someone who makes honey, right? How do you make honey? You maintain a beehive, right? And what do those bees do? Well, they go out and they gather nectar, and in the process, they pollinate a lot of flowers and stuff like that. And then they come back to the hive and they make the honey, and then the beekeeper, makes money off of the honey. So they receive the benefits of that activity. But if there's like a peach orchard nearby, those bees are going to be pollinating all of those peach blossoms and increasing the yield to the peach farmer who's down the street, right? So there's a positive benefit that's going to the peach farmer down the street that's not going to the beekeeper, but it's the beekeeper's activity that's generating that positive impact. Well, the problem is, from a social perspective, that's a really good thing to have. That's a good impact. That's something we want to do. But if the beekeeper doesn't receive the rewards of that positive activity, then the beekeeper will be predisposed to actually producing too little honey than what would be socially optimal. So if you don't receive all the benefits of your activity, you tend to underdo something. So the good news is that not only does the beekeeper bestow a positive externality on the peach farmer, but the peach farmer bestows a positive externality back on the beekeeper, because that gives, by virtue of having all those peach blossoms around, that increases the yield to the beekeeper. So what you typically find is that the free market will deal with this problem just fine, because each party will have an interest in teaming up with the other, because there's mutually beneficial gains to be had there. So in some cases, positive production externalities are perfectly accounted for in the market, because people kind of figure these things out, and they can reach an agreement, say, hey, look, I'll pay you to put your beehives near my farm because it's going to help me out, right? They can reach some contract or they can reach some agreement to kind of help each other out. And it may just be, look, I'm opening a new peach orchard. Why don't you come open up another beehive right next to it, and we'll both win. We'll both benefit from that. So those positive production externalities, when they're mutually beneficial like that, tend to already work themselves out. But if they're not, if it's just a one-way positive production externality, then there's going to be one of the parties doing a little bit too little of something. So that's just something to consider. On the consumption end, you can also have externalities on the consumption end. We just finished the holiday season here, and people like to put holiday lights on their houses. Have you noticed that there's a lot of around Christmas and stuff? There's people who put like a bunch of ornamental lights all over their house. Well, I don't do that, and the reason I don't do that is because I'm the one that would bear the electricity bill for burning all those lights constantly on my house, and it's other people, it's external individuals that receive the benefits of that activity. So that's why I've never really been inspired to put Christmas tree lights or whatever holiday lights around my house, because I pay all the costs and other people receive the benefits. Well, some people don't care about that, but in general, what you would find is that if there's a social benefit to having those lights out there, if people really like to go look at them, and there's enough people like me who are not doing it, at the margin, there's an under provision of this particular activity. You can also have, that would be a positive consumption externality, and that impacts the demand curve. So when you're looking in the textbook, you'll see this broken down with positive and negative consumption and production externalities, and the consumption ones will cause the demand curve to be shifted one way or the other. And by internalizing the externality, you can adjust it accordingly. There's negative consumption externalities would be things like pollution. When I buy gasoline for my car, I receive the benefits and I bear the cost of the gasoline. But if my car is polluting, if I have a very poorly maintained car that's polluting the atmosphere, that can result in things like smog and pollution that impacts people who might have COVID-19 and they're coughing, and that makes it worse. So there's that. That's why a lot of places, especially where smog is a problem, big cities, they require that you do inspections on your cars to prevent that externality, to prevent that from happening. So what I'm getting at here is there's always some kind of public response that the government can come in and help internalize that externality, whether it's with pollution regulations, or maybe in some cases just providing the good or the service, or subsidizing those behaviors. As it turns out, there's a reason why we have public funding of education, and it's not because education is a public good, which we will be studying next week. The reason that there's an economic justification for using government funding to help pay for K through 12 education, and that's because there's actually a positive consumption externality associated with education. When you educate your child, when you send your child to K through 12, you and your family receives the benefits of that activity, and you bear the cost of it, whether through taxation or if you're going to private school through tuition, that kind of stuff. The problem is that not only do you and your family benefit from educating your child, but society benefits. So there's actually a social benefit that goes to everybody else when you educate your child, because otherwise we have a bunch of stupid people, right? So a bunch of education bestows a huge positive consumption externality. The problem is if you and your family are not receiving those benefits, then you're not willing to pay for them, and we end up undereducating our children with respect to this overall social benefit of where we could be. So because we tend to undereducate, we would underpay for it, there's a justification for bringing the government in to help subsidize that. So that's what we see. We see some kind of public response with these externalities, and that's just something to always look for. So have a look at the graphs and look at how they do. And I'll do one real quick for you just to show you that it's not that difficult. So file, new, don't save. these are all going to be supply and demand graphs, just like you're used to, with your prices and your quantity. And I'll just do one of these, and you can do all the others, but I'll show you how they basically work. We'll do a negative production externality. So if this is supply and demand for the tire factory, for the rubber tire factory I was talking about, if this only includes the firm's private costs, I'll put PC for their private costs right there, and there's an externality that's resulting, if you were to internalize that, and that's the pollution downstream, if you internalize the costs of that, this would be the supply curve for rubber tires with the social costs included. All right, so that has all of the social costs included in it. So I'm going to SC for that. And what does that mean? It means that when we adjust for the pollution, what were we doing? This is not very neat. That's why I told you I was going to be kind of sloppy with this. There's the price. So that's the socially optimal outcome. That's socially optimal. That is inefficient. Inefficient. I'm not going to write it out because I'm using my mouse. So if we properly include the pollution in the externality, notice that we were producing too high of a quantity, and when we internalize the externality, we get to a higher price and a lower quantity, and that reduces the overall level of pollution, and that was the amount of tires that should be produced from a social perspective. But that's only if we include that negative production externality. So when you include it, you get back to that social optimal. So it's important to note that if you're concerned about some tire company, some manufacturing company that's polluting the environment, and you say, you know what, I think they should pay for that pollution. What's that going to do to the price of tires that you pay when you buy tires? Well, it's going to be embedded in that price. So understand that this has to be truly what we believe is socially optimal in terms of what we're willing to pay to prevent that river from being polluted, right? It's not just like, oh, well, I want the river to be clean, I just don't want to pay for it. No, this is what you're going to have to pay to have that clean river. So this is from an actual perspective, what we as a society actually value, not just what we say. A lot of people run around saying they want a clean river, and then you say, okay, give me the money to clean it up. They're like, well, I don't want it that bad. So we got to make sure that we properly capture that. But understand this, that when you force businesses and corporations to pay for their pollution, it gets embedded in the price. So it doesn't matter whether you punish the firms for polluting or force them to do all this stuff. The consumers are going to end up paying some portion of that. Okay, so that's how we do these things. You have an inefficient point, you have a socially optimal point, and the key is to say, well, what is the actual price and quantity that we should be at relative to what the externality is producing? So the externality had too low of a price, too many tires being produced from what is socially optimal. Okay, that's the only one I want to do. If it's a positive production externality, it just shifts the supply curve the other way. And if it's a consumption externality, it's the demand curve either going left or right, depending on if it's negative or a positive production or consumption externality. So that's how that works. Okay. The provision of a good is just, how much of it is provided. Is it an under provision or an over provision? And we just saw there was an over provision of rubber tires of that particular good because of the negative production externality. So what are the solutions to this? Sometimes we just use social conventions. Pollution is kind of a dirty word, and no firm wants that associated with them. The worst thing that happened to British Petroleum, BP Oil, was the Gulf oil spill about 10 or 15 years ago. When one of their offshore wells in the Gulf of Mexico ruptured and polluted the environment, It killed a bunch of fisheries in Louisiana. It caused a big stir. I think they made a movie about it, about how incompetent they were and how that shouldn't have happened. All of that really hurt that company. British Petroleum, BP, would have rather that not happened. They actually have an incentive because of the social pressure that they and the social punishment that they got. And people stopped buying their stock, so their stock price plummeted, all because they had a bad reputation after that. So most companies who aren't total idiots understand that there are social conventions, social norms that they don't want to violate. And that was really BP's biggest mistake. After the oil spill, their CEO was kind of like, yeah, whatever. And that really hurt the company. And he ended up being fired. And it's like, wow, that they really didn't get it. And sometimes they don't. But most companies understand that if they mess up like that, they need to come out strong and do some damage control and not violate those social norms and those social conventions. The companies that I've worked with have gone to ExxonMobil, one of the large oil companies, the largest, most successful, most profitable oil company, ExxonMobil. They go to great lengths to make sure people know how much they protect the environment. And the reason is because they had a big oil spill back in the 80s, the Exxon Valdez oil spill, one of the largest oil spills in history, that knocked out Prince William Sound, Alaska. And they were, after that, they kind of learned their lesson. They're like, okay, we have to show that we're protecting the environment, because otherwise it hurts us. So just us putting social pressure on these firms to not be jerks, to not pollute the environment, is one way to offset the externalities. Charity is another way. With things like pollution, you got the Sierra Club, and you've got Greenpeace. I'm thinking of the Sierra Club's a good example. These charitable organizations that protect the environment, and that's one way to offset these externalities, is through charity. I'm already mentioned some private market solutions, and that brings us to the thing called the Coase Theorem. I want to give you a quick little rundown of the Coase Theorem, and that'll be kind of the last thing we do, because it ties in with the rest of the stuff. So private markets, I mentioned the beekeepers and the peach orchard farmer. Those private markets will solve some of those problems. Ronald Coase was a mathematician and an economist who actually figured out something very important about externalities. Up until Ronald Coase, and this was probably in the 1950s and 60s when he did a lot of his work, up until Ronald Coase, externalities were kind of seen as just these random things that popped up in markets, and that we had to figure out a way to deal with them. And maybe we did that with regulations, like environmental regulations, or that's called the command and control approach. And make firms not pollute by punishing them if they did. And I actually worked with the EPA. We did a lot of that back in the day. And Ronald Coase was kind of curious about where externalities came from. Actually, he was actually more interested in property rights. And let me just, I can't write that out. Oh, wait, it's back. Right. Oh. Hold on, I think I got this. File, new, don't save. Oh, come on. Where's that one? Wait, let me go over here. No, I can't do that either. Paint. Add. Windows capture. Add source. There we go. Okay. Ooh, where am I? There I am. Okay. Okay. Oh, shoot. All right. Oh, come on. God dang it. All right. File, new, don't save. All right, I got to use my mouse because this technology just bites. The Coase Theorem. I'm not even going to spell it out because I'm too lazy. All right, I'm going to throw that iPad away. Anybody want an iPad? No, you can't have it. The Coase Theorem. The Coase Theorem, I'm just going to state it to you because I can't write it out with the mouse. The Coase Theorem states this. It basically says this: free markets will always solve, and this is written out in your book, so you don't have to write it down. Free markets will always solve the externality problem as long as two conditions are met. One, property rights are well defined and costlessly enforced. So those are the two conditions, that you have well defined property rights that are costly enforced. So free markets I'm just going to abbreviate it, solve all externalities as long as these two conditions are met. Property rights are well defined and two, costlessly enforced. Okay, there we go. Perfect. Free markets will solve all externalities as long as property rights are well defined and costlessly enforced. So I did want to get those written out just so we'd have them fresh in our mind here. This is the Coase Theorem. Ronald Coase presented this to the University of Chicago back in the day, and that was one of the premier econ departments. It's one of the premier free market econ departments in the world. It is the premier free market econ department in the world. The University of Chicago is just known for that. And he came in, and these are a bunch of economists who are like gung-ho about how great the free market is. And so a lot of people in the room did not like the notion of externalities because they had never figured out where they came from, and they were just kind of a fly in the ointment. They were distortions that hurt the free market. So in many cases, a lot of free market economists kind of downplayed these externalities because they went against the inherent efficiencies of the free market. When Ronald Coase came in, he presented this to them, and this really caused a lot of controversy because he basically said, look, externalities are real, but the free markets will actually solve any externality problem as long as property rights are well defined and costlessly enforced. What this means is that externalities have a source. If you kind of read this backwards, it says, wait, as long as you have good property rights that are costlessly enforced, then there's no externalities in the first place. That's what a backwards reading of that indicates. So what Ronald Coase did by identifying the conditions under which free markets could solve an externality problem is he inadvertently revealed the source of all externalities, which is poorly defined property rights or hard to enforce property rights. So let's think about pollution and how it's a property right issue. There's kind of this general misconception among people. We've been led to believe this. There's these evil corporations out there run by evil people who wake up in the morning and put on their evil hats and they go, "Mwah, ha, 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 I am evil capitalist pig. Today I'm going to destroy the environment for profits." Right? That's kind of the Hollywood version of where pollution comes from. And if you guys saw the worst movie ever, Avatar, the evil corporation was out there trying to get the unobtainium, stupid element, and what did they do? They destroyed the Navi's land, destroyed the tree of life, right? I mean, what's the message there? Evil corporations, and the guy was like drinking his coffee in the helicopter and like destroying all of the wildlife and all the beautiful landscape that was 3D movie. And he's just drinking his coffee going, I love the smell of like death in the morning. It's like corporations don't do that. That's so silly. But that's the image. And so let's think about it a little bit more rationally, a little more calmly, and let's not go down that road of, okay, evil corporations wake up in the morning and just want to kill everything and destroy the environment. What did Coase tell us? He said, nah, actually, here's the deal. Whenever you have a poorly defined property right, you're going to have pollution. So it's not an evil, sinister plot. It's just the fact that sometimes it's very difficult to do property rights, or sometimes we just choose not to identify a property right for some reason. So here's an example of what's polluted. Think about a river. There's a lot of pollution in rivers. And why is there a lot of pollution in rivers? Well, in the United States, we don't have what's called riparian rights, meaning you can't own a river. Now, I own an acre of land here in Macon, Georgia, and that acre of land is my private property. I receive the benefits from that land, and I bear the costs of maintaining my property. Notice that DuPont Chemical, some evil big corporation, is not waking up in the morning going, "Mwahaha, I'm going to go contaminate Greg's land. Let's go dump all of our hazardous chemicals on Greg's property." I wish they would do that. Why do I wish that DuPont Chemical, a multi-billion-dollar company, would pollute my 1 acre of land? Well, I could sue them in court for millions of dollars if they put their hazardous waste on my property. Why? Because the courts would enforce it. Knowing that I could sue the heck out of them for doing that, they're never going to pollute my property in the first place. But who's going to sue them if they pollute property that nobody owns, such as a river? Well, there's nobody there to sue them, so those places tend to attract pollution. There's never any corrective measure if there's no well-defined property rights. So we don't have well-defined property rights over a river. Also, the air. No one owns the air, so it gets polluted. So some things are just hard to establish a property right over, but that's basically why they get polluted. A more easy one is that kind of strip of land between the farm and the highway, and trash builds up there. If the trash blows into the farmer's land, he'll pick it up and throw it away. And the cars blow it off of the road, but it just gathers in the ditch there because that's no man's land. Nobody owns it. So the point of the Coase Theorem is that if you want to eliminate the externality, always look first to where there's a property right that's poorly defined or that's hard to enforce. And if you can figure out a clever way to allocate a property right, or to make it more enforceable cheaply, then that will eliminate the externality in the first place. So when economists look at any kind of externality, the first thing we look to is what's the property right that's not well defined here, and is there a way to fix that? If you don't fix the underlying property right issue, then you will continue to have an ongoing pollution issue until we figure out how to fix the idea that rivers are not owned by anybody, because that's a law. We want them to be navigable, so we don't let anybody own the river, so everybody has access to them. And as long as we have that underlying poorly defined property right, you're going to have the externality. If you look around the world at warfare, it's usually fighting over land. Who has the property right there? So war is actually an externality due to a poorly defined property right. And usually it takes one side kind of winning, convincingly in a war to say this is how the property right is going to be laid down. And one other interesting thing that I'll mention here about the Coase Theorem, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter who gets the property right, whether it's the good guys or the bad guys. The problem, the externalities are going to exist until the property right is resolved. Once the property right is resolved, then the externality goes away. So it's just whether you give the property right to the swimmers and the fishermen in the river or to the firm, actually. You can give, if the firm owned the river, they wouldn't pollute it, right? Firms don't want to pollute their own stuff. That diminishes the value of their land. It diminishes the value of that resource. So profit maximizing firms will not have an incentive to destroy their own property, only that property that they don't own. So that's one little sidebar of the Coase Theorem. Have a look at some of the environmental economic stuff there. There's a Pigouvian tax where you basically price the pollution and you charge firms to pollute. You allow them to pollute, but you charge them to do it. And the other thing is you just give them the right to pollute with tradable pollution permits. These are a really good idea that work when they've been tried, but they've become highly politicized. But the idea of tradable pollution permits is interesting because what it does, it basically gives the firm the right to pollute, but that right comes with a cost, meaning they could sell that right to pollute to another firm. So the second that you allow them the right to pollute and you give them, and that's valuable to a firm, right? A firm is like, oh, wow, if I can pollute, I can make money. I can make profits. But then they could also sell that pollution permit to someone else. So that's another way to make money. So that gives them an incentive to pollute less and actually sell some of those pollution permits to other people. And these have actually worked pretty well when tried. So have a look at tradable pollution permits and Pigouvian taxes. The regulation command and control approach does not seem to work very well because it encourages firms to conceal and hide their behavior. It's kind of like when you tell little Johnny not to hit little Stevie when they're playing. It's like, he's crying, and you go in there and it's like, stop hitting him. Stop, little Johnny, stop hitting little Stevie. And all that happens is that the next time that little Johnny wants to hit little Stevie, he just looks to make sure you're not looking, and then he slugs him. That's kind of how firms behave. If you command and control, they're going to pollute when you're not looking. And so you got to be careful with that. It doesn't work very well. All right. That's everything I wanted to cover with the Coase Theorem and with externalities. The last chapter we're going to do next week, Monday at 12:30. I'll get your tests graded today and get those up on D2L, so you'll have those scores to check on. But you should be fine with that. And we'll finish off chapter 11 next week, so have a look ahead at that. It's going to deal with public goods and private goods and natural resource goods and natural monopolies, common goods and natural monopolies. Private and public goods. It's an interesting chapter, so we're looking forward to running through that with you guys. I'll try to get my stupid iPad thing working. That was supposed to be me illustrating how good I am with technology, and it kind of backfired. So I'll see what I can do there. That being said, I'll be hanging out here for a bit. If you have any questions, feel free to hang out and ask questions. And if not, you are free to bolt. And I will see you guys next week at 12:30 on Monday for our last lecture. And otherwise, just hit me with questions if you got them. I'll hang out here for a bit. Doink. Oops. Put that pretty picture up there again. There's me in an oil field. There's a little bit of a delay, so I'll wait just in case you're just now hearing that I asked if you had any questions. Otherwise, that'll be all. Or you can hit me up on email, my greg.george@mga.edu. We have Microsoft TeamViewer up and running now. We could do classes that way, but there was just not enough time to set that up this semester. I'll look at that for my future classes. Not TeamViewer, Microsoft Teams, I think it's called. It's like Zoom. I like Zoom better, though. All right, well, seeing no questions, like I said, I'll get your tests graded today. Get those up on D2L, so you'll have your test 3 test scores. Our final exam will be in 2 weeks. And, it'll be due at the end of, I guess next week we'll do chapter 10, and then I can go ahead and give you the final exam, and you'll have until the end of the semester to do that and your papers as well. So if there's nothing else, I'll call it. Email me if you got any questions, and I'll catch you guys next week.